Greetings, all praise the King. Because of the not so unexpected cyber attack from the Roman soldiers of the Grease Monkey, this is another bootleg production. Now, keep in mind it's Florida in the summer and there is no air conditioning. So if Levi doesn't talk fast enough for you, find another video to watch, please. To make a correction, not really a correction, but to clear up a point, Levi stated that he wouldn't take anything back that he thought about. Well, he wouldn't. However, when the event happened, he was another man, and as discussed immediately following, he thought that George Bush would have had knowledge into the incident, perhaps. Since then, he's come to determine that George Bush does not possess the capacity to be trusted with this kind of knowledge. Therefore,
Greetings all, praise
probably kept out of the loop.
the only. Today we are covering the 9/11 Commission report, authorized version. And this is the first reading, as well as discussion on this topic. 9/11 is prophecy revealed. Even in Revelation chapter 14, Babylon has fallen, that great city that made the nations drunk from the wine of her fornication. And the third angel followed, saying, if any man worship the beast and his image and receive the mark, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of thy way. So unless we choose the wrath, let us choose the right, and in knowing good from evil. This display is a falsehood. It is not as the public has come to understand it. This novel is compelling. That doesn't make it true. It's still propaganda because it makes you want to believe it. This is a tool to pull people in, to prepare those for what is to come, leading the way for the Antichrist. And then they say the Antichrist will lead the way. What are the goals? Intelligence, as discussed. There's nothing Levi would take back that Levi thought about that day after reading this book. It is more than evident that the event ushered in a new era the digital age. The technology was already available, and man knew the capabilities, and man had a clue as to where this would all lead. But man needed justification, and this served the purpose. Is it an inside job? You better believe it is. You know, the first time I heard the story was when I saw the second plane crash into the building live. On the way to school, dropped over a friend's house. They started telling me about the first plane. Next thing you know, we saw the second one. For some reason, it didn't really faze me that much. I just remember I gotta go. I gotta rush to get to class. And immediately, it was an impression bestowed upon myself that George Bush was the culprit. Since then, I have recanted to realize that George Bush didn't have enough skill to be a part of this operation. Just as his predecessor and the forerunners, these guys are just feces. Their goal, their mission, their responsibility is to soothe the public, to make the public believe in a lie that this world is headed towards a utopia. Just participate in this man-ruled structure, and everything will work itself out. That's the overlying theme from these so-called administrations. And they are pagans. Even so much as to not know what they are, because as Satan, being the ultimate deceiver, so that in worshiping him, they deceive themselves. And they begin to believe their own lies. It's part of this conditioning that they go through internally to train themselves for this place. The common notion is, yeah, not everything's perfect, and neither is it gonna be. But we're a lot better off now than we used to be as humans. And so therefore, we're going to get even better. Who is we? They don't really define. Not Bin Laden. I'm guessing. So this craft is an ancient art. They have studied and perfected. And in the process, they have into a net. Nothing new. You know, they've been planning this for thousands of years. And very obvious. Taliban. They have a religious order. It is ancient. The story is they formed a government in 1996. Another story. This is a threat to, man's civilization. That man says these are not civil people because they have an uncivilized system. An uncivilized system that works for them. They're willing to go to these so-called extremes to defend. And where are the military for the capital rule? Why is it that they have to be incentivized to protect their God? How much is the Taliban going to make for income? And yet they will risk one life after the other for that cause. These idols that man serves, they become man's purpose to acquire. Without them, man seems powerless. He gives up hope. Damn. These devices. They say, you take one away from a child, and they'll have a spasm. Bondage. The Taliban is free, and that man hates their freedom. We know about the war in Iraq. You still see the bumper stickers. Iraq, freedom. And this is only another stage to prepare for the next conquest. Iran, using perhaps Pakistan is a platform, although the Pakistani people do not choose to subject themselves to this capital rule. And yet, after the event, they became forced underneath this agenda, carrying out its strikes using that region. Syria, having control over this Middle East gives these Roman forces the ability to orchestrate the war campaign from a nearby area. Essential when using some of the modern technology, such as drones, because you're not going to fly a drone over the Atlantic Ocean, at least at this point. The addition of departments that were added. You had the Homeland Security and the other various intelligence agencies for the purpose of infiltrating organizations, even within religious bodies, the church. Because as this display is presented, and it is, not only was, people in general form their opinion about what they see. And the images, in contrast, for example, with the real bin Laden, you had the fake, farce bin Laden. In this way, you have an image being cast of a holy man, and I say not in specific to this individual, yet the appearance of, because even if you looked at those rabbis in the state of Israel, you'll see they have these certain features. And so, in displaying the man known as bin Laden, you are forming these impressions. As to what it is that these so-called holy people look like. So, when you see someone that's ignorant, and they see you, if you have these features, then you're going to be scrutinized in their eyes, because they're questioning whether you're a terrorist. You know, this is an attack on the culture of I people. It is an attack on apocalyptic thinkers. man knows where man is headed. He may try to sell this dream, and he may convince himself. But deep down, he knows he's going down. He's trying to take you with him. If you be so dumb as to follow his way. To begin, I will reiterate my categorical definition of this composition, and that is a novel. We have some planes. Tuesday, September 11, 2001. Dawned temperature and nearly cloudless in the eastern United States. Millions of men and women readied themselves for work. Some made their way to the Twin Towers, the signature structure of the World Trade Center complex in New York City. It doesn't read like a report. It gives you descriptions, but it uses language to keep people entertained, to sell the story. There's all these details. They don't tell you how they found these things out. They just tell you this is what happened in the aircraft. I mean, at that time, was the technology available to monitor every cell phone call as it is now? We would presume no. And yet, if so, was it implemented? Or are these accounts according to the recipients of the call? Because they quote, and just about every account, they give you the appearance that, you know, these calls are word for word. It's getting bad, Dad. The stewardess was stabbed. They seem to have knives and mace. They said they have a bomb. It's getting very bad on the plane. Passengers are throwing up and getting sick. The plane is making jerky movements. I don't think the pilot is flying the plane. I think we're going down. I think they intend to go to Chicago or someplace and fly into a building. Don't worry, Dad. If it happens, it'll be very fast. My God, my God! The call ended abruptly. Lee Hansen heard a woman scream just before it cut off. He turned on the television, and in her home, so did Louis Sweeney. Both then saw the second aircraft hit the World Trade Center. I mean, this is not a joke. This is not the purpose of this discussion. And yet, the way that this is being reported almost makes it seem as if they are making a joke. You know, many people ask about the box cutters and say, you got a couple guys on an airplane with how many people? Again, it's not intended to sound insensitive. It just is what is being given as a fact, and it may be one that deserves questioning. Right away in the first chapter, the second section, improvising a homeland defense. The world classes have knowledge, and they know there's a major difference between their life and the lives of almost everyone. Almost everyone. And they're saying, you know, this could be dangerous. And so, naturally, by motivation to protect oneself, meaning one's wealth, they are looking to secure themselves. And what other way to secure themselves than by seeing what everyone else is doing all day? And that's basically what they got. You know, the Pentagon realized, we got this machine, it has these capabilities, we've got to sell this. And that meant the smartphone that would be the device that could be used to spy on people. And yet, at this time, the mentality of the culture was more sensible. They weren't so irrational because they weren't in a scary position. After this event, all the propaganda, people were in fear. And so they were not so reluctant to give up their civil liberties, which they didn't even know existed. And that became the culture, the norm. People began to rely on this new ability of the military, which exists all the way down to the local law enforcement. The question is, you know, whether the flights could have been stopped, whether there was pre-existing knowledge that these attacks were to occur by those in the highest positions that would have the authority to obstruct a obstruction of the operation. And it is reasonable to assume, based on the persona of the characters involved, that this is quite possible. We're given details, you know, there's excuses made up about the military. They only had so much time to respond. We're told that federal agencies learned about the crash in New York from CNN. The vice president was wondering how the hell could a plane hit the World Trade Center. And there was teleconference calls, some of them didn't work out, some of them worked out. And it paints a picture of a government that is unorganized and didn't have the training, neither the tools to effectively handle this problem. The equipment is certainly a priority for upgrading, as well as the law, the structure, because what happened was the legislation came into effect where it gave these sweeping powers to these agencies. And not only that, but the agencies could now communicate with one another. So, for example, you know, some states have different rules about certain things, and so you would have a problem if someone was doing something that was permitted in one state and not the other. So when it comes to wiretapping, this is basically what we're talking about, is that these committees were working on behalf of those few shareholders of these major corporations that have the technology to spy on everyone. And they were looking for all the information and some. But it was considered a violation of one's privacy, according to their Fourth Amendment. Protect one's persons against any unlawful search and seizure against the person, papers, and effects. They circumvented this after this 9/11 event. Some of the ways they did it was roundabout, some was direct. Rest assured that not only the government or military of the United States has access to all the information, communications that you put out, yet the governments of the other countries of the world, as well as private companies and even individuals. We learned about the Facebook founder that started a company to get all the information that the police have, which police is FBI. You use that term, very general. for, private individuals. If you have the cash and if you're in the networks, like, for example, bin Laden, he might have had cash, but wasn't like this was going to let him have the ability to have this information, because this is an inside network. And some call this like Illuminati. It basically could be considered this. But that's for another day. This is an occult. They operate in secret. And they serve Satan. The president told us his instinct was to project calm. George Bush was, he knew how to handle things real well, according to him. Sounds like we have a minor war going on here. I heard about the Pentagon. We're at war. Somebody's going to pay. All that tough guy image. And it works, because the people in this region are, in this land, most are powerless. And when you have petty mannequin standing and clinking his heels, they feel like they're a part of something big, and it gives them that jolt of energy, I guess maybe even you could call it hope, to survive. This is a new type of war. And now, it's being blamed on bin Laden. As mentioned, there are two bin Ladens. There's the real bin Laden, who it's hard to tell what happened to. And there's the Fox News bin Laden. Now, the Fox News bin Laden doesn't look like the real bin Laden. So maybe that was a bad judgment, but it almost looks like it was meant to be a joke. The Fox News bin Laden is the one in the picture. He's got the hateful look. The real bin Laden is more serious. Based on these accounts, they had X amount of opportunities to capture this man. It was fouled up. The U.S. military didn't want to harm any women or children. And so therefore, the alliances, the covert alliance, backed out. Then, there was a continuance for a search. He's supposed to be here. He's supposed to be there. Obviously, they used him to raid Afghanistan, which they still are in Afghanistan. So even though the pre-notion was, we're going after this guy, his group's the threat, and they're being harbored by this other group. And even though the threat now has been eliminated, no proof, didn't want to startle the bones. And yet they're still going after the Taliban. So, by appearance, one may presume that this man was already captured. Now, the real bin Laden supposedly was getting about $1 million a year. He had supposedly about 300 million in wealth, yet he was only being advanced $1 million annually. So after he disagreed with the Saudi Arabia government relationship with the United States, his account was frozen. And then these stories start to appear. This incident about the bombing in Africa, other incidents after he declared this jihad. And then he pops up again. He pops up. Different face, different beard, different garments. We're being told it's the same guy. And he's laughing about, the event. Interviewed later about the deaths of the Africans, bin Laden answered, "When it becomes apparent that it would be impossible to repel these Americans without assaulting them, even if this involved the killing of Muslims, this is permissible under Islam." Asked if he would indeed mastermind these bombings, he said that the World Islamic Front for Jihad against Jews and Crusaders has issued a crystal clear fatwa. Now, crystal clear, is this the language that this man would use? I mean, would he answer the question by saying, quote, "When it becomes apparent that it would be impossible to repel these Americans without assaulting them, even if this involved the killing of Muslims, this is permissible under Islam." Computers can do a lot today. Now, even on the Science Friday, we're being told about the AI having the ability to put porn stars' bodies on people. And obviously do their nasties. So one of this prevailing waves is this attack on the Jews. Now, it doesn't specify which Jews. There's different sects of this faith. Some are the faith sect. And often these folks are being mixed in with not only the Africans, but now the Crusaders. They seem to be perpetually under attack from all sides. Not the other Jews, these Jews. The NSA is ramping up communications. Now the language is used, the Signal Collections Agency. If you know what's happening, you know what they're saying. don't, you're going to read that and not perhaps think much about it. Instead of just saying the cell phone monitoring agency, which is the same thing. As a matter of fact, the signal collections implies they do more than just cell phone monitoring. You know, they're looking to run the synagogues and church through the state. The reality that potential terrorists were often members of extremist religious organizations, and that investigation of terrorism could cross the line separating state and church. They were looking to infiltrate, and therefore, when this event happened, it gave that opening. FBI issues a 5-year strategic plan. The light came on. Cultural change had to occur. The plan mandated a stronger intelligence collection effort, called for a nationwide automated system to facilitate information collection, analysis, and dissemination. It envisioned the creation of a professional intelligence cadre of experienced and trained agents and analysts. Poor state of the FBI information system meant that such access depended on large part on the analyst's personal relationship with individuals. FBI had never completed an assessment of the overall terrorist threat of the U.S. homeland. FBI did not have the effective intelligence collection effort. Collection of intelligence from human sources was limited, and agents were inadequately trained. This is the opening for the Antichrist, the artificial intelligence that's going to perform these duties, sort it out, disseminate the information. Because, remember, as we spoke about this class content classification, perhaps known as input-output mapping, but it's the content that's generated through those devices has a psychological effect in each individual, uniquely. So when they categorize the individual through the DNA, what they're doing is they're watching how that individual's behavior changes, and they're adjusting that DNA to reflect this. And they're looking for what they call the perfect DNA. Even some people try to take up this as a religious cult to say that Adam had a perfect DNA and everything else counted down. What about the Christ? So this man is totally out of his wits. And they're going to say, this is the DNA we have. We'd love to have all the other people join us in unholy orgy. And we can watch it over and over on our virtual reality. FBI did not dedicate sufficient resources to the surveillance and translation. FBI's information systems were woefully inadequate. FBI lacked the ability to know what it knew. There was no effective mechanism for capturing or sharing its institutional knowledge. Agents did create records of interviews and other investigative efforts, but there were no report officers to condense the information into meaningful intelligence that could be retrieved and disseminated. FBI created separate counterterrorism and counterintelligence divisions in 1999. Counterintelligence. This is these YouTube videos. Levi was protesting, and this man says, "Come over, let me see you something." He says, "Oh, you've been watching YouTube videos." He sees the eye, you know. I'm saying, yeah. But even that, these videos not only have pushed people away from the truth, but they're repelling people from those that know truth. See? Because, let's say this situation right here, the official narrative of 9/11. If we would like to discredit this, you know, what they call undermining, we could put out a video and present these facts that they're giving facts, but in a fashion that is less than trustworthy. Yeah. You can just scramble up information. You can put sound over it. You could just make the video have flaws. People are not going to want to believe it. But you're presenting the official narrative. Now the trick now is in the distribution. Are you going to be seen? And that's where these guys have managed this process so that the content that they produce is seen, whereas the content that those truth givers produce is hidden. Nowadays, unfortunately, a lot of it is in the presentation. You can have the same meal on one plate. What do people eat? Filet mignon, the blah blah blah. So you give them their little stuff. Filet mignon, mashed potatoes, some vegetables. And you put a little rose, tie up a little fancy ribbon, and throw it their way. Or you take the same meal, cut that thing, mash it all up, mix it with the mashed potatoes, put it on a paper plate, and throw it their way. Same meal, same food, different presentation, turns people away. It's a class structure culture. People are afraid of looking inferior. They don't want to be on the bottom. They want to feel like they're winners. For many years, the Attorney General could authorize surveillance of foreign powers and agents of foreign powers without any court review. But in 1978, Congress passed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. This is one of these so-called safe measures. It's checks and balances the system had. They passed a law, won't let them do it. Then they start telling you about the CIA. CIA, they're not accountable, they're not responsible, they don't admit, they don't decline, they're just independent. So how is it that you're supposed to trust that this Foreign Intelligence Act is going to protect you? Supposedly they got to get a warrant, and now that somehow there's a judge involved, so it's not going to get out of hand and be abused. Well, 1978 Act was interpreted by the courts to require a search to be approved only if its primary purpose was to obtain foreign intelligence information. In other words, FISA law could not be used to circumvent traditional criminal warrant requirements in this kind of thing. So essentially what they're telling us is that that's all out the door with 9/11. That not only are they taking the information without your consent or knowledge, but they're actually selling it to this monster, the bird. Finally, the NSA began putting caveats on its bin Laden, blocked the arteries of information sharing. So, according to this account, there was all these problems because these guys were abiding by their law, which prevented them from sharing or accessing information. It's not very believable. There's reason to believe that this was happening before, but these guys weren't. They were loosely interpreting the monopoly law. And so they decided, we want to interpret the monopoly law effectively. So let's get these bills passed now that people are in this shell shock from the event. DEA agents able to introduce sources to FBI or CIA. So you got the DEA now giving sources for counterterrorism. The Immigration and Naturalization Services, seriously hampered by outdated technology, insufficient human resources, still using manual typewriters. National Security Unit, examine how immigration laws can be brought to bear on terrorism. A terrorist watch list were not even available. Treasury houses Secret Service, Customs Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco. Interesting to know. The Treasury Department houses the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ones that got caught smuggling with the Sinaloa cartel, smuggling stuff. Moreover, law enforcement could be effective only after specific individuals were identified. This identification process. Now we'll see facial recognition, voice recognition, all this stuff to identify. And they still say, what's your name? What's your address? What's your social security number? As if they don't have this already. 9/11. The FAA's no-fly list contained the names of just 12 terrorist suspects. So, there's a ramping up of this no-fly list as well as the watch list. One of the intelligence agencies in defense with the National Custom Base is the National Security Agency, which intercepts and analyzes foreign communications and breaks codes. Another is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, providing imagery. Again, the technology was there. They needed a reason to use it. These guys love spying. They love looking at other people's genitals. And they don't like it when other people know that they're looking. Bottom line. You got the Army, the Air Force, the Marine Corps. In addition, the intelligence communities include the Bureau of Intelligence and Research and the State Department, the intelligence component, the Treasury Department, the Energy Department, Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, the Energies Department's Office of Counterintelligence, the Office of Intelligence of the Coast Guard, and the Intelligence Analysts and Infrastructure Protection in the Homeland Security. The law requires the NSA not to deliberately collect data on U.S. citizens or on persons in the United States without a warrant based on the foreign intelligence requirements and this kind of thing. That's gone. Terrorists, in turn, have benefited from this time rapid development of communication technology. Now the terrorists got the communications. You got to stay one step ahead of this guy's injecting these microchips into people's heads, and he's saying, you got to stay ahead of the AI. Structures built in tension between CIA and Defense Department's intelligence agencies, between the CIA and the FBI. So these departments were basically linking up. It was supposed to be unification. Supposedly everybody was gung-ho, and they went to war, and they didn't appear to be successful. Although, by some accounts, that may not be true. These wars now are rampant pitches. They're rampaging, and they're taking, and they're trying hard not to leave anything behind. Yeah, you got the regular fear mongering. They'll launch a comprehensive plan to detect, deter, and defend against attacks on the critical infrastructure, our power system, water supply, police, fire, medical services, air traffic control, financial services, telephone system, computer networks. If you're watching this, you may notice that some of the videos that Levi has made are bootleg because Levi's experienced infiltration into his computer, although the computer wasn't even connected to the internet, it was on his side. So these so-called threats are giving way for these offensives against citizens within these borders, on the rationale that they're protecting their infrastructures. Speaks about the trying to keep the U.S. hand out of sight in these covert wars. That's the purpose of it. So, if anyone is to question whether the U.S. or some of this so-called world-class Roman forces are involved in the recent uprising in Syria, there's really no need. It's a continuance. When these fellas couldn't get their job done, they had to come up with a new enemy, and simply because they were using the term Al-Qaeda too much. As we recall, in this last administration, you had the term being used for the first 4 years until this new group, so-called, took over. And supposedly they had ties. Well, if they had ties with Al-Qaeda, then Al-Qaeda would have grown. Al-Qaeda still would have been a threat. Of course, there's Protestants, so Al-Qaeda is still a threat. But they're not projecting it as, they're not beating it into your head. They try to beat this ISIS, but that was, again, imagery to project this painting, their portrayal of what religious order looks like. Because that's the real issue at stake for them, is their structure of rule. Because without it, They will no longer be able to carry on in their theft, lies, murder, adultery, vanity, profanity, blasphemy, dishonor. Without being accountable. They're going to destroy. The United States launches the airstrikes. This guy, the Mullah Omar, has anybody seen this guy? He's in pictures. They've got some posters. He's the warrior-looking guy. Maybe he's got one eye, and you know, I mean, for real. Somebody let me know, because it seems like he could be a fantasy. What happens is they infiltrate these groups. They take over the face of the leaders, just as in the case of bin Laden. And they gain the members' support, and then they can use these groups to further their interests. They have some sanctions, Security Council Resolution 1333, included an embargo on arms shipments to the Taliban in December 2000. So there was already efforts underway to obstruct those operations of that organization, whatever they could possibly, they may be defending themselves. Yeah, here's the stories. During September and October, the tribals claimed to have tried at least 4 times to ambush bin Laden. Worst of all, Al-Qaeda's senior leadership had stopped using a particular means of communication almost after the leak to Washington Times. You know, they add these companies in here. They're doing some advertisement. Al-Qaeda, Al Sudan, Iran. I mean, they act like the news communication channels have information that the military doesn't. This is another thing that should spark people's curiosity to say. Doesn't that seem backwards? So, in doing so, they're feeding the perception that something has to be done to be able to get more information to those that they say need it. Consider a cruise missile strike. They considered a cruise missile strike to kill bin Laden, but they were concerned about the damage to a nearby mosque. By the end, they decided against. Under the law of armed conflict, killing a person who posed an imminent threat to the United States would be an act of self-defense. Now they're beginning to work their magic. The tribals explained they wanted to prove their standards of behavior were more civilized than those of bin Laden, so they didn't actually go after him. One reliable source reported bin Laden having met with Iraqi officials who may have offered him asylum. So now they're searching for options. They're saying boots on the ground, no boots, oh, covert, oh, drones. They're introducing this predator drone. Some of this information is new, so they're actually informing people, hey, we have these capabilities, we didn't tell you before, here it is, now we have a reason to use it. President Clinton told the commission, if we had a really good intelligence about where bin Laden was, I would have done it. There was still larger option that could have been considered, invading Afghanistan itself. Every official we questioned about the possibility of invasion of Afghanistan said it was almost unthinkable. They weren't really actually thinking about invading Afghanistan. They were just stopping the trade, putting embargoes and sanctions on them. And they believed the public would not support it. Cruise missiles were and would remain the only military option. No strike was launched. Taliban, Northwest Frontiers, and Clinton's authorization to list certain hirelings, expressing a preference for capture but accepting the possibility that bin Laden could not be brought out alive. Yeah. You know, the story is that the CIA trapped bin Laden. He was in his compound with his 2 wives. You know, they were telling us that bin Laden was living out in the caves in the mountain region. Well, that story changed, and now they're sending a special SEAL team in. Some special team. Yo. Bin Laden's here, bin Laden's there. Military's doubting the intelligence. It looks like a 50-50. The United States mistakenly bombed the Chinese embassy and bin Laden's weapons of mass destruction. Reports of possible attacks on bin Laden kept coming. There's a threat to blow up the FBI. CIA saw a 95% chance of Special Operations Command Forces capturing bin Laden if deployed. If the gain clearly outweighs the risk. But at this time, no such gains presented themselves to warrant that risk. As 1999 came to a close, CIA had a new strategic plan in place for capturing bin Laden, but no option was rated as having more than a 15% chance. You see the propaganda. This man they must have shaved him and kept the mustache and did something, probably ruffled his hair or something, took his head covering off, upset him, and took a picture. That alone is suspicious. The reason why they don't just display the picture of him, and why they have to, you know, present him in a particular way, is very, say, unkosher. At the meeting, he briefed bin Laden on the world bombing. You know, there's all these they've got the information, they've got a guy who told them all these details, every meeting, you know, where it was, who it dealt with, potential Jewish targets. Again, Yemen, the Taliban, bin Laden's recruiting for the coming battle with the United States. And you know, with all the information that these guys were being told they had, they should have known that it wasn't the United States acting alone. You even had the theatrical presentation with one of the Beatles, Jihadi John. You know, he was in the desert, and even, you know, you saw the thing. And so, it's like you would think that these guys would be saying something about England. They came from England. They said they hate the West. The West. And this England is the heart of the West. It's not the United States. The United States is a vehicle. It was colonized from its very inception by the same European world classes, oppressors. Memory ran out on the camera. So Taliban's greeting the Al-Qaeda and this kind of thing. More or less making excuses for what was happening. Exemplifies traits sought to discourage. I mean, these guys, these faces of the terror, the so-called conspirators, is really something in itself. It's like, are these people computer generated images? Are they for real? I mean, Muhammad Atta, for one, you know, and that became the signature face of the thing. And so it's kind of like leaving an impression to say, yeah, this guy looks scary. He repels you, right? And this kind of thing. And then, so it makes the story easier to swallow. And then you begin to look at some of the other faces that don't really look so scary. And so the impression is, wow, this could be anyone. So they didn't have them wearing beards or anything. But even at that time, would the beard have raised the suspicion? Or would the beard have raised more suspicion 5 years later? Because supposedly they shaved. And then there's these accounts of their personalities, you know, which is all over the board. Again, it could be anyone. Wahada was abrasive and dogmatic, but he was also charismatic, intelligent, and persuasive. He was a decision maker, described as a global Jewish movement created in New York City that supposedly controlled the financial world and media. This is what he was against, which is like not too far from the truth, although they're not real Jews. You know, Saddam Hussein was an American stooge, ready to fight, and this kind of thing. He even grew a beard. And you had the other accounts, members of the religious but not too religious. Another guy perceived it as a Jewish world conspiracy. One fellow was criticizing his wife for not being religious enough and dressing too provocatively. He grew a full beard. And he started praying. Page 163. Ziad Jarrah. Another man whose members, according to one participant in the meeting, tended to deal only with each other. very large sum to finance their attacks. It does not appear that any government other than Taliban financially supported Al-Qaeda. Before 9/11. Another goal of this campaign is to eliminate this hawala, an informal and ancient trust-based system of transferring funds, because it's portraying this as being intricate piece of this operation. This is the new, going into this new PayPal era, where now they're requiring that Levi update a credit card that Levi no longer has after that thing began to be chipped. They're saying bin Laden's paying the Taliban. President Clinton was deeply concerned about bin Laden. Samuel Berger, special daily pipeline of reports feeding them the latest update on bin Laden. Clinton spoke repeatedly about the threat of terrorism, and he intended to avoid enhancing bin Laden's stature by giving him unnecessary publicity. Now, take note, because that's true, that these guys are not going to give their enemies attention. They realize they're the criminals themselves, and therefore they have people that disapprove with their actions. And they don't want people to unite that have this sentiment towards them. And so by dressing someone on a platform, what they're doing is giving a voice to those people through one particular person. It could be anyone, because the magnets say, oh, you support bin Laden in this thing. But this is reality. They're not going to give you attention if you are a genuine threat. That's why the situation with the WikiLeaks is a hoax, because these British bull and the crappy American counterpart, they're not going to spend the time to discuss the fellow, if the fellow really is, this kind of thing. So this is the manufactured opposition, and that's why when they began to use bin Laden, the fake Fox version, they are sending that signal that he is the fake Fox version, because they would not have given him the attention otherwise. The Y2K, threw everyone off. Telephone calls are intercepted by Jordanians. So they mentioned the telephone call being intercepted by the Jordanians. Again, this is like preparation for this beast state that we now are in. They're looking to identify each individual and to bring them to that place of worship and servitude of the Antichrist. protected by the beast. The beast Taliban's money that season. CIA is still working with the tribal assets in Afghanistan. They quickly determined that women and children were inside and called off the ambush. The tribals had acted within the terms of the CIA. So now we hear about these bombings that have killed so many countless children, women, men, and like, that's provocation. It's even how the military sacrifices those recruits because they know that will drive up more demand for recruitment, because the people have relations, and now those relations have this connection, feeling like they, to honor the lost one. And that's where that patriotism develops. It's a blind patriotism. One option was to use a small unmanned U.S. Air Force drone called the Predator, which could survey the territory below and send back video footage. Another option, eventually dismissed as impractical, was to place a powerful long-range telescope on a mountain within range of one of bin Laden's training camps. So, it's like, enter here or enter here. Truly astonishing, he argued immediately for more flights seeking to find bin Laden. Even if bin Laden were not found, Predator missions might identify additional worthwhile targets. After a second sighting of the man in white at the compound, intelligence community analysts determined that he was probably bin Laden. Still, Clark was optimistic about Predator. The light at the end of the tunnel is another tunnel. President Clinton was very frustrated. And you got to talk about this central con man, the CENTCON. Does Al-Qaeda have to attack the Pentagon to get their attention? I think you'll find that by far your biggest threat is bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda. One of the great regrets of my presidency is that I didn't get him for you, because I tried to. This is what Clinton had told George Bush. The new team at the Pentagon did not push for action. Rumsfeld. In the spring, reporting on terrorism surged dramatically. mosaic of threat intelligence came from the Counter-Terrorist Center. Counter-Terrorist Center, which collected only abroad. Its reports were not supplemented by reports by the FBI. Mark had expressed concern about al-Qaeda presence in the United States, and he worried about an attack on the White House by Hezbollah, Hamas, al-Qaeda, and other terrorist organizations. Now, they spell al-Qaeda, Q-I-D-A here, on page 204, because there's two organizations. After the organization was taken over, they used the Q-U-E-D-A. But people know that this is sometimes spelled Q-A-I-D-A. So there's a difference because one is said to mean the base, like the headquarters, and another is said to mean the toilet. Cheney would himself lead an effort. The Vice President's task force was just getting underway when the 9/11 attack occurred. Wide-ranging discussion then ensued about breaking the back of bin Laden's organization. Large-scale program of covert assistance to the Taliban's foes. The draft authorizes expressly stated that the goal of the assistance was not to overthrow the Taliban. Now today, the goal in Syria is not to overthrow Assad. Three-phase strategy. First, an envoy would give the Taliban a last chance. The United States would try covert action to topple the Taliban's leadership from within. The Taliban, since then, has become split. That people in the region see it is two distinct groups. One is considered good Taliban, another is considered a bad Taliban. The bad Taliban is doing all these bad things that are then being reported, and is giving the impression that that's the Taliban. But again, look at these covert operations by the CIA with al-Qaeda, and then you'll know, because bin Laden was fighting against the Russian Soviets in Afghanistan with the CIA, but the CIA had not informed him that they were undercover. So that's the difference. That people write books and say that this bin Laden was working with the CIA, but it happened without his knowledge, and they had the same goal. So it's like, even today, where the United States admits to working with these labeled terrorist organizations, such as the al-Nusra, they say, oh, well, their goal was to fight against the regime, but not to topple it. Rice met with the visiting Pakistan Foreign Minister Abdul Satta. She really let him have it. Cheney called Crown Prince Abdullah on July 5th, 2001 to seek Saudi help preventing a terrorist attack. Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz was confirmed in March 2001, and Under Secretary of Defense Policy Douglas Faith in July. It focused, as Rumsfeld told us, on creating a 21st century military. Commander of Central Command, General Franks, he says he did not regard the existing plan as serious. Al-Qaeda would need to go all the way, following through the details of a full campaign, including political, military issues of where operations would be based, and securing the rights to fly over neighboring countries. mechanism for a lethal attack on bin Laden, an armed version of the Predator drone. They favored resuming Predator flights over Afghanistan as soon as weather permitted, hoping they will still might be elusive, actionable intelligence to target bin Laden with cruise missiles. Learning that the Air Force was thinking of equipping Predators with warheads, Clark became even more enthusiastic about redeployment. They concluded that it was legal for the CIA to kill bin Laden or one of his deputies with the Predator. Now, one might have thought that with 250 million whole in a destroyer and 17 dead sailors, the Pentagon might have wanted to respond. Instead, they have often talked about the fact that there is nothing worth hitting in Afghanistan. CIA prepares new draft legal authorities for the Broad Covert Action Program. The attack looms. To date, neither we nor the FBI have been able to verify Abdullah's alleged jailhouse statements despite investigative efforts. Yeah. So they're projecting this as a thorough analysis. They're going to tell you, oh, we couldn't get the information, but most of the information, they don't really tell you where it came from. And much of the information comes from very few sources. On April 6th, 9th, 10th, and 11th, Atta's cellular telephone was used numerous times to call various lodging establishments in Florida from cell sites within Florida. We cannot confirm that he placed those calls. Leading way. Al-Qaeda members received advice and training from Hezbollah. Ordered directly to bin Laden at an Al-Qaeda facility known as Compound 6 near Kandahar. Pentagon Jihad, the capital, both Atta and Shia would hit the World Trade Center. If any pilot could not reach his intended target, he was to crash the plane. If Atta could not strike the World Trade Center, he planned to crash his aircraft directly into the streets of New York. Atta also mentioned he had considered targeting a nuclear facility he had seen during familiarization flights near New York, a target they referred to as electrical engineering. According to the Nile ship, the other pilots did not like the idea. They thought a nuclear target would be difficult because the airspace around it was restricted. Yeah. There's these codes. Supposedly they're talking in codes when really they didn't have to really talk in code. And yet they're bringing more attention to themselves had someone been listening. And again, this is giving way for this National Security Agency, which is the code breaker. Had an autopilot feature did not allow them to be crashed into the ground. So there was a type of plane that had this feature that this Muhammad Atta had known about, and supposedly didn't allow it to crash into the ground. It sounds like the plane were already at the point where they were being externally manipulated or having some sensor devices. Is it quite possible that the plane could have actually been flown by someone other than those in the cockpit? They discussed a friend who was coming as a tourist, a cryptic reference to candidate hijacker. Yeah. It's a night entry and this kind of thing. to Las Vegas. Yeah, it was odd. It flew around quite a bit. Yeah, someone should find those the documents, the listings for his flights. May not have been discreet. He may have telephoned his companion in late August. Several bits of evidence indicate others in Abdullah's circle may have received word that something big would soon happen. His behavior changed noticeably. It's part of the Antichrist is to define, categorize who people are, and to define what makes people behave certain ways. And so they can use this for manipulation. So, they behave suspiciously at the gas station. Attacks were near completion. The entire operation is being questioned at the top. Interacting constantly with the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda leaders would never lose sight. I will make it happen even if I do it myself, bin Laden is quoted. Mullah Omar shows up against reported to oppose this course of action for ideological reasons rather than out of fear of U.S. retaliation. He said to have preferred for Al-Qaeda to attack Jews, at capital J. And there's an unknown reason that the two drove to Maine, leaving this window of darkness. In 2001, it's useful to understand how threat information is generally collected and conveyed. Information is collected through several methods, including signal intelligence and interviews of human sources, and gathered into intelligence reports. Preparation. Conditioning process. To May 24th, Yemen and Italy, as well as a report about a cell in Canada that an anonymous caller had claimed might be planning an attack against the United States. Official at the Counterterrorism Center told us he and a colleague were considering resigning in order to go public. They were considering it. Surveillance photos. It's now clear everyone involved was confused about the rules governing the sharing and use of information gathered in intelligence channels. NSA approved the passage of information to the criminal agent. He could have conducted a search using all available information. The result is confusion. The criminal agents who were knowledgeable about Al-Qaeda and experienced with criminal investigation techniques, including finding suspects, possible criminal charges, were thus excluded from the search. So they're looking to connect these agencies with the technology. If they're looking to follow you and you drive across state lines, they gotta say, hey, this guy's gone across state lines. It's no longer in their jurisdiction, so you see how it has to work through the feds and to the individual states and various departments. Here's another detail. Again, one of these, beast state, beast savior, rather, checks and balance schemes. U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis would find insufficient probable cause of a crime to obtain a criminal warrant to search the laptop computer. Page 273. This fellow, Zacharias. Agents at FBI headquarters believed there was insufficient probable cause. They were concerned. They sought a special warrant. It's highlighting these so-called checks and balances. FBI agents failed to persuade supervisors at headquarters that there was enough evidence to seek FISA warrant. They failed to persuade. Connections might have brought investigations to the core of the 9/11 plot. Only after 9/11 would be discovered that Mukhtar KSM had communicated with a phone that was used by bin Ashib, and that bin Ashib had used the same phone to communicate with Mu Sayyid. The final piece of the puzzle arrived at the CIA's Bin Laden unit on August 28th in a cable reporting that KSM's nickname was Mukhtar. No one anticipated the possibility of a total collapse. How could we forget Building 7? The experience of the military suggests that integrated into such a coordinated response should be a unified field intelligence unit, which should receive and combine information from all first responders, including operators. The lesson of 9/11 for civilian and first responders can be stated simply. In the new age of terror, we are the primary targets. The losses America suffered that day demonstrated both the gravity of the terrorist threat and the commensurate need to prepare ourselves. We must plan for that eventuality. A rededication to preparedness is perhaps the best way to honor the memories of those we lost that day. The government's ability to collect intelligence inside the United States and the sharing of such information between the intelligence and law enforcement communities was not a priority before 9/11. Guidelines on this subject issued essentially recapitulated a prior guidance. However, the attacks of 9/11 changed everything. Less than 1 week after September 11th, an early version of what was to become the Patriot Act, officially the USA Patriot Act, began to take shape. A central provision of the provision was the removal of the wall on information sharing between the intelligence and law enforcement communities. They were saying that they were concerned, that they were going to break the law, they didn't want to know about these terrorists, in this thing. And now they've opened a way to share the information between the agencies. Truly, they probably would like to just keep the information for themselves, because they realize how valuable it is. You know how these people work, like I said. They don't want to leave anything behind, meaning they don't want to be found out, and they want to take as much as they can, because in acquiring that information solely, they enhance their position on the earth. Within the limits of the Constitution, collecting intelligence and mounting covert operations, proposed inserting teams into Afghanistan to work with Afghan warlords who would join the fight against Al-Qaeda. How many people were in Afghanistan that were members of Al-Qaeda that they so-called killed or captured? And then let's take those numbers and let's put them next to Taliban. CIA teams would act jointly with military special operation units. President Bush later praised the proposal, saying it had been a turning point. Presidential Directive 9, now titled Defeating the Terrorist Threat to the United States Directive, would now extend to a global war. Rumsfeld's instinct was to hit Saddam Hussein at the same time. Wolfowitz made the case for striking Iraq during this round of war. The department was ready to deal with Iraq if Baghdad acts against U.S. interests, with plans to include possible occupying Iraqi oil fields, possibly. The Taliban must act and act immediately. They will hand over the terrorists and they will share in their fate. This is civilization's fight. President Bush addressed on September 20th. Tonight, we are a country awakened to danger. Destroy the Taliban regime. Fail. Since Pearl Harbor, the intelligence community has devoted generous efforts to understanding the problem of forestalling a surprise attack. Rigorous analytic methods were developed, focused in particular on the Soviet Union. Number one, think about how surprise attacks might be launched. Number two, identify telltale indicators connected with the most dangerous possibilities. Number three, where feasible, collect intelligence on these indicators. Number four, adopt defenses to deflect the most dangerous possibilities. Number four, adopt defenses to deflect the most dangerous possibilities. You're going after. Intelligence communities' collection management process did not set requirements to monitor such telltale indicators. Preparation. There were limits to see what the CIA was able to achieve in its energetic worldwide effort to disrupt terrorist activities or use proxies to try to capture or kill bin Laden and his lieutenants. Another possibility, short of putting U.S. personnel on the ground, was to issue a blunt ultimatum to the Taliban. The most extended debate on counterterrorism in the Bush administration before 9/11 had to do with missions for the unmanned predator. Whether to use it just to locate bin Laden or wait until it was armed with a missile so that it could find him and also attack him. Looking back, we are struck with the narrow and unimaginative menu of options for action. Early in the report, we detailed various missed opportunities to thwart the 9/11 plot. Information was not shared, sometimes inadvertently, or because of legal misunderstandings. Analysts were not pooled. Effective operations were not launched. Often the hands-off of information were lost across the divide, separating the foreign and domestic agencies of the government. Consider, for example, detailed in Chapter 6. NSA analyzed communications, sort of blah, blah, blah. NSA did not think its job was to research these identities. It saw itself as an agency to support intelligence consumers. If NSA had been able to try to identify these peoples, the agency would have started by checking its own database of earlier information from these same sources. So that's how you know that after the event, not only were they listening to the conversations, but they're storing them so that, as one person who developed the program said, they could go back. So the plan is to store everyone's communication through any of those digital devices. Now these devices have the microchip somehow can be, the information can be sucked out of it even if it's not connected. All the recent devices are wireless. You hear people like billionaire Penny Pritchard, Madame Harder talking about they're going to work with the manufacturing companies to the money market guy, right? So what they're saying is the head of the Treasury Department is this so-called government is the corporations owned by the Rothschilds, whoever else, Satan's minions, control the world economies. If NSA had been asked to try to identify these people, the agency would have started by checking its own database of early information. Some of this information had been reported, some had not, but it was all readily accessible in the database. NSA's analysts would have promptly discovered the situation. Period between 1999 and 2000, information about terrorism flowed widely, but there was a bottleneck. And so this is the other thing they're saying is that, hey, they were already sharing information. Then some people started taking shit. And so they had to put a closed lid on because their operations weren't successful if the information providers were aware of those operations. So they're not going to be like getting the so-called good information from people, say, searching on the web or something, if the people are saying, hey, I'm searching for something, and whatever I do on this internet is being intercepted by whoever, for whatever. So the whole thing was a sneak attack. Not only are people's liberties under attack, the actual livelihood. And it was done through basically a sucker punch. 9/11 has taught us that terrorism against American interests over there should be regarded just as we regard terrorism against American over here. In the same sense, America, homeland, is the planet. Chapter 360, page 362. The second enemy is gathering. No president can promise that a catastrophe attack like 9/11 will not happen again. The U.S. government, joined by other governments around the world, is working through intelligence, law enforcement, military, financial, and diplomatic channels to identify, disrupt, capture, or kill individuals. This effort was going on before 9/11, and it continues on a vastly enlarged scale. But to catch individuals, U.S. or foreign agencies need to be able to find and reach them. Western notion of the separation of civic and religious duty does not exist in Islamic countries. Somebody was wondering, how can a man in a cave out-communicate the world's leading communication society? The United States does not act aggressively to define itself in the Islamic world. The government has begun some promising initiatives in television. People lose hope when societies break down, countries fragment, the breeding grounds for terrorism is created. biometric screening system, statistic analysis to biological data, DNA, biometric identifiers that measure unique physical characteristics such as facial features, fingerprints, iris scans, and reduce them to digitalized numerical statements called algorithms. So really, this is the DNA that they're referring to, because they're saying a person has unique characteristics. Is that not the DNA? And they're saying they're reducing them to digitalized numerical statements. Is that not the DNA? This goes hand in hand, this artificial intelligence with the DNA. The DNA is a man construct. It's not like it's really your DNA. It's your DNA interpreted by someone. Many of the Act's provisions are relatively uncontroversial. Talking about the Patriot Act. Some of the most controversial provisions of the Patriot Act are to sunset at the end of 2005. Don't worry, it's going to finish. Many of the Act's provisions are relatively uncontroversial. Updating America's surveillance laws to reflect technological developments in digital age. Some executive actions that have been criticized are unrelated to the Patriot Act. The provisions in the Act that facilitate the sharing of information among intelligence agencies and between law enforcement and intelligence appear, on balance, to be beneficial. Because of concerns regarding the shifting balance of power to the government, we think that a full and informed debate on the Patriot Act would be healthy. You know, these guys are playing this card that they're open. There was the meeting that took place. And the real deal is that this is not official. It's an act. It's non-fiction. There may be facts, but it's a movie that says this is based on a true story. Homeland security and national preparedness, therefore, often begins with the private sector. Page 398. The sector to ensure preparedness. Combining joint intelligence and joint action, a smart government would integrate all sources of information to see the enemy. Integrated all-source analysis should also inform and shape strategies to collect more. In our first section, we concentrate on counterterrorism, discussing how to combine the analysis of information from all sources of intelligence with the joint planning of operations that draw on that analysis. In this section, we step back from looking just at the counterterrorism problem. We reflect on whether the government is organized adequately to direct resources and build the intelligence capabilities that it will need not just for countering terrorism, but for the broader range of national security. There's all these agencies. I mean, we started to name some. Officer of Director of Central Intelligence. That's an office. You've got the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. You've got the NSA. You've got the NGA. You've got the NRO. You've got the DIA. You've got the INR. You've got the Terrorism and Finance Intelligence of the Department of Treasury. We've got the Intelligence and Counterterrorism and Counterintelligence Division of the FBI. You've got the Department of Justice, the Office of Intelligence. You've got the Directorate of Information Analysis and Information Protection, and the Directorate of the Coast Guard Intelligence and Department of Homeland Security. Enough said. Too complex and secret. Over the decades, the agencies and the rules surrounding the intelligence community have accumulated to a depth that practically defies public comprehension. Agencies and rules surrounding the intelligence community has accumulated to a depth practically defies public comprehension. This is true. Recommendation. Finally, to combat the secrecy and complexity we have described, the overall amounts of money being appropriated for national intelligence and to its component agencies should no longer be kept secret. Congress should pass a separate Appropriations Act for the intelligence. Information sharing. Unity of effort in sharing information. The biggest impediment to all source analysis to a greater likelihood of connecting the dots is the human or systematic resistance to sharing information. The biggest impediment, but their problem is us knowing, as stated. The culture of agencies feeling they own the information they gather at taxpayer expense must be replaced by a culture in which the agencies instead feel they have a duty to the information to repay the taxpayer's investment by making the information available to them and to only them. Page 417. We propose that information be shared horizontally across new networks. This is government acting in new ways to face new threats. While such change is necessary, it must be accomplished while engendering the people's trust that privacy and other civil liberties are protected, that businesses are not being unduly burdened, taxpayer money is being well spent, network will be effective in protecting our security. Leaderships emerging from all levels of government and from many places in that private sector. We've considered a proposal for a new agency dedicated to intelligence collection in the United States. Some call this proposal an American MI5, although the analogy is weak. The actual British Security Service is a relatively small worldwide agency that combines duties assigned in the U.S. government to the Terrorist Threat Integration Center, the CIA, the FBI, and the Homeland Security. The future role. Because the FBI can have agents working criminal matters and agents working intelligence investigations concerning the same targets, the removal of the wall that existed before 9/11 between intelligence and law enforcement has opened up a new opportunity for cooperation. FBI agents and analysts in the field need to have sustained support and dedicated resources to become stronger intelligence officers. They need to be rewarded for gathering and disseminating information differently and more broadly than usual. FBI employees need to report and analyze what they have learned in ways the Bureau has never done before. Recommendation. A specialized and integrated national security workforce should be established at the FBI consisting of agents, analysts, linguists, and surveillance specialists who are recruited, trained, rewarded, and retained to ensure the development of an institutional culture. An institutional culture run by linguists and surveillance specialists. They got you figured. The FBI is just a small fraction of the national law enforcement community in the United States, a community comprised mainly of state and local agencies. The network designed for sharing information and the work of the FBI through local Joint Terrorism Task Force should build a reciprocal relationship in which state and local agents understand what information they are looking for and, in return, receive some of the information being developed about what is happening or may happen in their communities. In this relationship, the Department of Homeland Security will also play to map threats. Threat to who?